Welcome to Ethical Edge Insights, Conversations with Changemakers, a space for deeply reflective conversations with those shaping our world. Here we explore their journeys, their greatest challenges, their most significant contributions to date, the contributions they seek to make, and how ethics have shown up along the way. Join us as we uncover the stories that shape our shared future. So, hi Eve, thank you for joining me for a conversation. Like I've said earlier, I'm really enjoying these conversations and what comes up during them, not just the stories, which are really delightful to hear, everyone telling their stories, but the information that kind of arises from the dynamic of the conversations. And you and I have had lots of chats about different things, so I imagine we'll whirlwind this one. So
Yeah.
the change
Well,
makers
thank
in
you.
Changemakers in Conversations is where we're at for Ethical Edge Insights, and let's go. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I really enjoy talking about ethics. And I know you do. So we're set.
So I haven't really introduced you, but I'd like you to. So what would you like us to know about your story from where you began at whatever point you want to share? Everyone shares from a different point. Some are very young, some are mid, wherever. Your story to where you've come to here now.
Gosh, well, I think I've always enjoyed learning. And so if there was a story, I mean, I could be really short and say I've always enjoyed learning. And that's perhaps been a theme across my life. But I will say a bit more. My life, well, apart from school, I'll forget that bit. But in terms of my professional life, it's been divided into three parts. And I wish I could say that the links I see now were part of a master plan, but they weren't. And I certainly didn't plan it. But I do know certain things. And one of the things that really interested me from very early days was this idea that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And I suppose thinking where I am now, that was an early indication of an interest in systemic thinking, of seeing that everything's connected. So I think you know this, but my first career was in music. And I was a classical guitarist, and I was actually at concert level, but chose not to do that as a career. And the truth is, if you're a classical guitarist or a pianist or anything that's a solo instrumentalist, I was practicing 6 hours a day and you do it alone. And that wasn't the way I wanted to spend my life. Maybe I'm a little bit too sociable, but it just wasn't for me. But I have always enjoyed working with people. So I think one of the things about my life is about working with people and not feeling I have to be the expert. So something I don't think you do know is I conducted a student orchestra, but I was a really bad conductor. Well, I was a singer, I was a pianist, and I was a guitarist. And you probably noticed none of those are really orchestral instruments. So I was put in front of an orchestra to conduct it for a concert. And I didn't really know what to do. I mean, I had some of the rudiments because I'd studied it at university. But another thing I learned was just have fun, have a partnership, admit what you don't know, and work on things with the orchestra. So the orchestra had great fun teaching me what to do when I didn't know what to do. And I think that was a great lesson. And then the next summer job I had, um, which was really interesting, was working for a major orchestra. I mean, one that's world renowned. And I'm not going to say which one, because the lesson I learned from that was how people behave depending on how they're treated.
Mm.
And there was one conductor I saw rehearsing with them who was unbelievably authoritarian. And for people who know about transaction analysis and the parent-child egos, it was all critical parent. And it was all telling them what to do. And they started behaving like kids. And it was so interesting to watch that. And then I watched them rehearse with a conductor that they just really enjoyed working with, who had the same idea of fun and partnership and what should we do with this and are you enjoying this? and they laughed, there was respect, and it was mutual respect. And I
Mm.
think across the time you just pick up lessons, don't you, about that. Um, my second career was working in the BBC. And I started as a technician, which isn't surprising because I suppose I had some I was reasonably adept at operating controls because I could play an instrument. And that was okay until I decided I wanted to be a journalist. Hmm. Well, okay, how do you become a journalist when you've never trained as a journalist? Well, one answer might be to be a bit annoying and to keep going up to the news editor and say, please let me cover stories, to which the news editor, being surrounded by people who'd done 3 years at university studying journalism rather than music, and who or had worked in newspapers, in the end, to get rid of me, just used to take stories off the spike. Now, I don't know if you know about the spike in a newsroom, but it's where they put the stories they're never going to cover because they haven't
Mm.
got the resources. Either they're awful stories or they just haven't got the resources to cover them. So in the end, to keep me quiet, he took stories off the spike and said, well, go and cover that then. Okay. Um, and in the end, they got used. So that I think that was another thing about being persistent.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I didn't pick up the being annoying bit, but I was certainly quite persistent. But also, I think I was offering things, and people, if you offer something to somebody, in the end it was a win-win really for the news editor because they didn't have he it was a he didn't have to use them. So ultimately I got a job in radio and then television as a journalist,
Mm-hmm.
and then an editor, and again I was offered a chance to be a presenter, taking
Mm.
someone who's quite well known, and again I just decided I didn't want to be a presenter. And that was interesting because you start learning about yourself when you're given certain options, don't you?
Mm.
And I knew I preferred to be in the background. And thinking about it now, this is what I mean about if only I'd planned it this way, I realized I like working with teams.
Mm.
And actually, as a presenter, you do work with a team, but when you're an editor, or a producer, there's that sense of working with a team and creating something that goes on telly every day. So I worked in telly and radio for a long time, but I ended up running a division with 250 staff who were nearly all journalists, which is really quite ironic when you think where I started with that spike and taking stories off the spike. Um,
Mm.
but it was during that period, working in the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, that I got this opportunity to be coached. And to be
Mm.
honest, coaching was like a revelation for me
Mhm.
on so many levels. Um, and that opportunity to talk and to be heard, or and to not be judged, I mean, that
Mhm.
was a big part of it. I think I just ended up hooked. And so the BBC had an internal training program for coaches. So I trained as an internal coach and ultimately trained as a supervisor. And then, of course, my third career, um, which is now. Um, I just see that I've drawn from all those early lessons because I love this idea of partnership, communication, collaboration, which are things you and I do. And wanting to bring people together, and that's been a big part of it. So I've always had the sense of those being part of my values and what I really like, for to experience with other people. And ethical thinking has just become part of that. So I
Mhm.
think that's probably the clearest link for everything I do. And so whatever I write about, I think I've worked out, because I write, all right, I have a practice, but I write, I research, just as you do. I think I've worked out that ethics actually is is the thing that connects it all for me. That is at the heart of everything that I do. It's the way to be true to our values. It's the way actually to think, to behave, but actually to just be. Which is why when people say something about ethics, I just say ethics is everywhere. Like the film Love is Everywhere. Well, I think ethics is everywhere. So I think that's what I say about me. Yeah, that's my story. And I'm really pleased I've had the story I've had, because it lets me be where I am now, and all of it's helped.
It's interesting when you say, there's a couple of things that kind of came to mind. And about you saying that you're a collaborator, but you bring people together. And tying that to the things you learn about yourself according to the different places that you step into. And I can reflect on that even within myself, that I'm someone who brings people together, but I didn't know that until my 40s. And someone pointed at me and said, "You are someone who brings people together." I went, "Yeah, how?" I never really looked at myself in that way. So, and it's just these life experiences that kind of show these different parts of you, or they enable different parts of you to come alive that maybe were there.
Yeah,
And they do
but I
form
suppose,
part of your values, yeah.
yeah, and I think, when I look at what you do, it's exactly that. The whole is more than the sum of the parts. By bringing people together, there's so much that can be done, and it's that recognition, isn't it? But I'm a bit like you. It can take a while to catch on to it.
But I guess this is what we're doing in coaching as well, isn't it? Is helping people understand all the different parts of themselves that arrive at different times. And that's an important part of them learning about themselves and how they can use that to the betterment of what they're doing and where they want to go.
Yeah,
And then the question is that, I speak about ethicality. I've written on ethicality, and that is kind of in line with what you were saying about how you be. I see it about walking the world, viewing everything through an ethical lens.
mm.
And so what do we do with people that are contrary to how we see ourselves in the world, where there's like a friction there, I mean, there's always going to be everything that's contrary to us. We're not all the same little beings popping around the world, but when the friction arises because of that,
Mm.
what do you think about working with those scenarios?
I think, Wendy, that is such an important question right now. I'm not saying I have answers to it, but we're recording this in the first half of 2025, actually the second quarter of 2025, and the change that the world is going through right now in the global world order, the political changes. That's a real challenge probably for all of us, and a challenge for many of the people we work with. So what do we do? I as I say, I don't think I have an answer for turbulent times. I think I can talk for myself and say that one of the things I have to make sure I don't do, not that I like to use negatives, but I want to remain being non-judgmental. What
Mhm.
I don't want to get in is into blame. I don't want to get into the drama triangle of persecutor. They're wrong, I'm right, and nor do I necessarily want to try and rescue people. So I think, I don't want to be simplistic about it, but I do think that one of our greatest gifts through the training we've had in our profession is to be able to listen and to ask careful questions that may be challenging, may be supportive, but hopefully for many people will help them with their increasing self-awareness, and an increasing ability to understand the impact that we all have. I mean, the thing is, we all need that self-understanding, we all need that self-awareness, we all need to understand the impact we have. So when you ask that question, it's not that I have the perfect answer, but it would be to try and stay in that place of being in partnership, and of being relational. Because in the end, for me, ethics is relational. You and I are talking now, we know we don't have to agree about everything. And because we are who we are, I listen to you, you listen to me, and we may change each other thinking a bit, and that's fine. But we don't feel we have to change each other. And so ethics is relational. Um, I'm trying to think whether I've had situations where I've worked with people. I can think of an instance where the way a client was behaving was very clearly from their own feedback having a difficult impact on the team that they were part of. And I can remember, I just remember thinking, how will we talk about this in a way that the person will understand that impact, but not feel that I'm blaming them or telling them off, or because who am I to judge, you know? So it was just thinking about the questions, which is why, again, back to our, you know, the earliest days of our training, the what questions, the how questions. I wonder how that, I wonder how the team were responding then, you know, those simple questions and avoiding the questions that can make people defensive. Because if we go into defense, we're not going to be in the best place for having a conversation, to having a real dialogue. Does that sort of begin to answer the question? Because I'm interested to hear what you think too.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about it a lot, and I hear different stories about it being put on coaches, and I'm not sure what other professions, to be honest, that they must not be coaching in the space of a particular, for want of a better word, ideology. So let's just bundle them all into ideologies, whether it's science-backed, whatever, just put them all in ideology. And that concerns me, that then coaches are really concerned about that, and they're having this imposed on them, this way of working. But then I also questioned the idea that coaches would impose a particular way of working on with someone as well. And I go, well, let's think more deeply about this, rather than someone external saying you can't work this way or work on this topic. And I say, well, if the topic arises in the conversation, then you want to run with it. But do I need to impose it? And there are a lot of conversations, I think, going around the coaching space now, where there are a lot of different elements that we have to be careful about how they're addressed in the coaching space, because are we there for ourselves, or are we there for the coach, the coachee?
And you know what's really interesting about this is that as I've become older, I mean, you started the age thing because you mentioned about the 40s. And I just remember, as I've got older, I've felt that I've been able to be more authentic about who I am.
Yeah.
And so those meetings that we have with our clients, whether for me they're coaches, supervisees, let's say, you know, leaders, those conversations now, I don't hide who I am. Not that I ever deliberately hid who I was, but I think I'm much more overt about what matters to me and what my values are now. And I can't say, maybe that just does come with age. And I'm sort of pleased about that. So that means that both in the chemistry meeting, we call them that, or in the and in the initial contracting meetings, we can talk about those things. And I think the idea of imposing things is a challenging one. And you know, I'm sure we'll go on to talk about some of the things that I'm interested in, you know, around, for example, climate. But I think how we introduce it and how we contract around it is really important.
Yeah, and we've had our own tensions around that, and we've sorted it out. We're
But
both
that's fine,
saying,
isn't it? That's
yeah,
good because we've listened to each other. And I think that's the whole point of the conversation we're having. That's what ethics is. It's
yeah.
relational. It's not
Mhm.
about right or well, I'm not saying it's never about right or wrong, but it's for me, it's rarely about right or wrong. It's rarely binary. It's so much more nuanced than that a lot of the time.
So now we've mentioned climate, it has arisen, but let's just not focus there. But it leads me to my next question, which can be positioned wherever you want it, whichever one of the three spaces of work that you've been in. And that is, what do you consider to be your most important contributions to the coaching, mentoring, and leadership space?
Yeah, and I'd add supervision to that, because I think supervision has been a huge part of my practice. I've thought about that, and you know, the first thing I'd say, and I think the foremost thing I'd say again is really, it's been about bringing people together, and it's been about collaborating and working with others. Um, and that's underlined by what I've indicated, which is this idea that we can do more so often together than we can do apart. So the thing I feel has been most important, and I mean, I know that's my subjective judgment, has been things like establishing the Global Supervisors Network, which I did at the start of 2016. And that was a community set up for supervisors, because at that stage there was really no CPD for supervisors. So I'd been a supervisor already then for about 6, 7 years. And given I started off by saying how much I love learning, I mean, there just weren't those opportunities really for learning in the same way that there had been in coaching more generally. So I'm really pleased, and I think now to date, we're recording this in 2025. We've probably had 260 sessions on such an amazing range of topics, all of which are recorded and available to people. We have 400, 390 members across the world, working everywhere. And it's just been the most fantastic learning experience. But also, I know that people have met through that, and they've worked together through that, and other things have been sparked through that, like the American Coaching Supervisors Network. So that's sort of sums it up for me. That's, to me, the most important thing. And a second thing that and this time I co-founded, was the Climate Coaching Alliance, which was co-founded in 2019. And now there are nearly 4,000 members. And again, this amazing opportunity where people have come together, and then they've started working together, bridging countries, cultures, and so on. And those are the things that I think are most important, because I think for me, that's how change happens. That's how change happens. The other thing I would say more generally has been a contribution, has been co-writing the joint statement, which is now signed by 13 signatories. So these 13 signatories include the ICF, the EMCC, APAC, Commensa, the AC, and so on. And that's a statement on the climate and ecological crisis, which is currently being rewritten. So again, I think that has had, well, lots of impact, partly because it was the first time so many bodies representing about 300,000 coaches had come together and worked on something collectively, where everything that we do and everything that's offered, it's offered free. And anyone from any of those 13 signatures can attend. Well, in fact, anyone can attend, and there's no charge. So, of course, I will say, working with clients, writing has been a contribution, and being involved with podcasts and conferences. But I think the ones where there's the collaboration, the things that will continue, are the things I'm proud of. And and actually I am really proud, because I have received I think 9 awards from professional bodies, like the AC and the MCC and the BPS and Coaching at Work magazine, which has recognised my work in research, coaching, supervision, climate, and writing.
You and I both know that the Coaching Ethics Forum is not a signatory to anything. And I think it's worth mentioning that it's not a signatory to anything, and that's intentional, to not be so. So as we are really holding that space of neutrality across all things, and just bringing people in to discuss everything, rather than the forum itself having a particular position. And I think that's important. actually, for the work of ethics that we do that. I just wanted to mention that because I'm aware, and you're aware, that I've refused to get involved in that way, get the forum involved in that way. So is there something that we don't know? Like, you've done some huge things for the coaching field. Is there something else about your working life or even non-working life that you're quite proud of that we don't know so much about, but it still tickles you?
Gosh, what my well, what tickles me? Well, I mean, it's a really good question. I think if I go back many years, I was I was really pleased to have played classical guitar so well because you know, we all have very different backgrounds, and I didn't start playing musical instruments till I was relatively old. I mean, I was only 12 or 13, but that's actually quite old. But by the time I was sort of 21, I had a diploma from one of the music colleges in London, in classical guitar. And I am really proud of that because I think it, it underlines things like if you really want something and you're prepared to put in the time and the effort, and you know, you're an example of this. If you really want something, you put in the time and the effort. You know, you can achieve things. Um, and I think that learning has sort of stayed with me across my career because I've never been um, afraid to work hard. And
Mm.
my idea of working hard is probably working, I don't know, 60, 70 hours a week. I can't remember the last time really when I haven't worked 7 days a week. And I can imagine anyone listening to this or watching this will say, yeah, of course, we're all like that. You know, we all, you know, we answer some emails and we do some writing, particularly at weekends, you know, doing the writing. Um, so I think that's one of the things I'm really pleased about.
Well, I have a new tune. I've worked the last 6 months, 24/7 with intention, knowing there'd
Yeah.
be an end point. And I'm at the end point now. So I'm actually not working the hours I once did because I wanted more balance in my life. And I think from an ethics perspective that that's really important that I live what I preach.
Mm.
And, I work at the intersection of ethics and well-being and coaching. And so I want to mirror and actually be what I'm proposing people be. And so I've actually now started a new trajectory. I'm not getting as much done, but I'm having more fun and I'm happier and I feel more balanced. I have more time for the other things in my life that are actually all as important as my working life. So
Yeah. I mean, you raise a really important point because well-being, and you are right in terms of thinking about clients particularly, and that this whole idea of not just business but busyness. This we
yeah.
need to be busy. I think what I feel personally is incredibly lucky to
Mm.
just enjoy what I do so much and to get a sense of purpose out of it. And I think that makes a huge difference. And I'm very aware that that certainly isn't the case for all the people we're going to work with. Um, and so that, yeah, that role modeling is very important. I mean, I don't doubt that at all.
Mm. So I'm going to move to the next question.
Okay.
Is And you've already spoken to this a little bit, but let's explore it a little more. And what role does ethics play in your decision-making
Mm.
process? And do you have a specific example to share with us, bring it to life?
Yeah. I mean, the role, I think I have said, I just think it's fundamental. I, I mean, I could say it's like the glue that sticks everything together for me, ethics. Um, and it's about who we are, what we do, the values we espouse, the decisions we take, how we interact with people, which we've touched on. Um, and of course what we believe is right and wrong and what is true and not. I think what has become increasingly clear to me, partly through reading and through training, is that ethics is so different for each of us. You know, we each have different backgrounds, and even people who may look the same. You know, you and I might look the same, and actually you've got blonde hair and I've got dark hair, but you know, we have different backgrounds, different cultures, different experiences, different geographies, um, and we relate across relationships and difference. And I think everything about us, you know, our gender, our heritage, our religion. I mean, you know, one thing you said, what do you know about me? You know that I'm half, in fact, I'm more than half Ukrainian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but what you didn't know is that my great great grandfather got married. I think he got married 5 times, but I think it was the sort of relationship where if the wife died in childbirth, they married a
Oh,
cousin or a sister or something.
wow.
But he had 28 children.
Wow.
I know, I know. I should have sorted that one earlier. But anyway, so but all I'm saying is that's obviously had an impact on me. That sort of background and knowing that my family had to flee the
Mhm.
place where they grew up, which was Zhytomyr in the Ukraine. So we've all had this different heritage, and of course things like neurodiversity are part of that, and disability and so on. And I think that the role it plays, you know, when we meet people, so I meet your coachee or I meet a supervisee, what we're doing is we're bringing everything we are, and I mean us as the coach, as the supervisor, we're bringing everything we are, our norms, our prejudices, our biases, our assumptions, that we can fall into, um, and and the other thing around, you know, the role ethics plays is maybe I'm better at it now, or maybe I just think I'm better at it now, but we can believe we hold truths, that somehow what we think is true,
Is
even
true.
if it's uh, even if it's unconscious, we
Hmm.
may have this sort of secret belief that, yeah, but I'm right. And that,
But
uh,
I am right.
yeah,
Even
yeah.
I am right.
So how does this affect the decisions we make? How does it affect the relationships we get into? Might we collude with some people? Might we misunderstand others?
Mm.
And I just want to mention one person who I have found incredibly helpful in this regard. Because when I trained as a supervisor, in fact, I did 2 trainings. And the second training I did was with Bath Consultancy Group. Um, and I worked with this extraordinary person called Dr. Judy Ride, who ran this program called Working with Difference, which for me was really inspirational because it was all about ethical thinking, ethical behavior, but actually what you picked up on, ethical being. And for those who don't know Dr. Judy Wright, all I would say is, and as you know, Wendy Ann, Professor Peter Hawkins is lucky enough to be married to her. So that says enough. Um, so that's been part of my ethical thinking. What am I not noticing in me? You know, what am I not hearing in myself? And all that uncovering of my own assumptions, my own beliefs, my own values, how they might get away, etc. Um, as for an example, one of the things that's a bit surprising is as I've got older, my clients have got younger. Hmm, something about that, isn't there? And one of the things sometimes I have to do is address that. I mean, I don't say you're young and I'm old, but what I mean is, again, culture comes into this. Sometimes people seem to hang on to every word and they want you to tell them what to do, or well, what do you think? And at the worst, they may even put you up on a little bit of a pedestal. And sometimes it is about age, and that can be cultural, and it can be to do with respect in different cultures. So for me, addressing that is quite crucial. And um, that's again, I know I've said this before, but contracting is just so important. How will we work together? How will we address the challenges, whether they're challenges of age, which I've mentioned, or ethnicity or neurodiversity and so on. So I suppose it all comes down to that. Let's be open and have dialogue, because that's what relationship is about.
Yeah. Do you have, well, I was gonna ask another question just to get you to dig a bit deeper, but we'll move on to the next one, because in the next one I will dig deeper, because I'd like you to bring one of your own experiences, a specific experience, whether it turned out the way you wanted it, in a good way or a bad way or whatever. We learn from all of it. So we're going to tunnel in a bit on the next one. And that is, can you describe a time when you were challenged? So this, I've not mentioned the word ethics here, Eve. I just want to highlight that. But you were challenged to act on a decision and how you overcame it.
There are different levels of this. So on one level, it might be speaking to someone who could be could become a potential client, a coach or a supervisee, and then
I'm going to interrupt you for a sec if I can. Can you identify a specific example to
yeah,
speak
I've got an example in mind, and it's from a
Okay.
while ago, and having the conversation, you just have the sense that they're not the right fit, and what I want to highlight is that I don't want to be simplistic about this, because I know I work with a lot of people who are trying to be coaches or supervisees. It's often how I work with them, and they're having to earn a living. They're having to pay a mortgage, and I'm now at the point where I've paid off my mortgage. It actually does make a difference, and so the choice of not working with someone, to me now, can seem a simple one. I don't think we're the right fit for each other. I don't think I'll give you what you want, and I don't think you'll get what you need from me. And I think you'd be better with someone else. And I've said that to people, and I feel I can be honest about that. But I'm just holding that concern that I could sound really simplistic about it, because I've worked with people who are desperately trying to make enough money to cover their costs. But that's with the person I'm thinking about. Well, there's more than one I'm thinking about, but to be able to say and have that open conversation that we've had this conversation, and I'm not sure that we're right for each other. You're wanting this. I think what I offer is that. So that might be challenging, and I think it would have been much more challenging years ago. I think now it's less challenging, and how I overcame it, partly through, I think, what I said earlier about being authentic and knowing who you are, and doing that work on self, which we've already
Have you ever
alluded to.
have you ever had that conversation, either recent or over the years, and the conversation went a bit not how you expected, either from your own self or from the other person that you were speaking to?
Do you know, I have, and sometimes, excuse
Can
me,
you tell us what happened, how, just what the crunch was and how you worked through that?
what I was thinking is that when I think there's something about listening to how you're feeling about something. This isn't just about words, it's about what's going on in your body, what's the reaction you're having. We get data, if I can use that word, from all sorts of things, not just from what we're saying. And I think the challenges have come for me when I don't listen to the data of how I'm feeling. So somebody might say, actually, no, I think we'll work really well together. and I think for this reason and this reason, I think we should do this. And then, and it might be, I'm thinking of one example
Mm.
where you hear what somebody's saying and you're simply not convinced they want coaching.
Mm.
And it may just not be the right time for them. But from everything they've said, or it may be that the company you begin to discover may have just said that they wanted coaching when actually the company wanted them to have coaching more than the individual wanted coaching. And when I've been persuaded against those inner feelings, I think that's a challenge. And I think one of the things I've had to do is learn to listen to myself more and be stronger about actually this isn't the right time and this isn't the right person. And I think actually that is really an ethical issue.
Mm. So what's this data that you experience that tells you, what is that experience?
I mean, well, of course, it can be different things, can't it?
Yeah, but I want to know for you. So that's
It's
why we're
not,
honing in on an
oh, yeah.
example.
But what I mean, for different people, it can be different things. So
Mhm.
sometimes it can just be a discomfort. Sometimes it can be a discomfort which is, I don't know, butterflies in your tummy. Sometimes it can be a tension in your shoulders. So there are just different ways that that can come out. So whatever it is just to notice what's happening and then to think, what is that about? Because of course sometimes we can be misled by the data, because the
Have you
data
an
can be about
example?
us. Sorry.
Have you an example where you were misled by the data?
um well, I have, but not in I absolutely have, but not, well, okay, so I was once taking on a new client and I'd not met them before, and they walked into the room and they were 6'8". Now, why did that matter? Because I'd had a very bad experience as a child with a man who was 6'8".
Mhm.
And that's what I mean about just have to check in yourself. What
Mhm.
is this about? Because this
Mhm.
could be about me, not about them, and not about our relationship. It could
Yeah,
be transference.
absolutely.
So absolutely, that's an example.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that example.
Oh, I still remember it very well. And actually, I have to say, I went on to work with that person
Mhm.
absolutely fine, because
Mhm.
I identified that it was my stuff and it was nothing to do with that relationship, and the relationship was fine. But there are other instances where simple things can happen. I don't know if this has happened to you, but someone asks you to endorse a book, or they ask you to write a reference to on LinkedIn, and just asking that question, because I always want to support people, as I know you do, but I have to think, do I know this person well enough? What role modeling am I doing? And also, why this person and then not this person?
Mhm.
How do we feedback the decision in a way that is seen as respectful and understanding? And I think there's another area which maybe we can go into, about challenges, about what industries we work in. Um, that's for me a challenge, because theoretically I believe everyone can benefit from coaching, as I'm sure we all do. Well, everyone who's ready for coaching can benefit from coaching. But what about when someone approaches you from an industry, and for me it was the cigarette industry? What do you do about that? And I went through all sorts of things, because I don't think there should be blanket turn downs. I've got all sorts of thoughts and emotions and little inner arguments that went on. But in the end, I just felt that was a distraction. And because of that, I wasn't the right person to do the work.
Suddenly, I'm feeling that after all these different conversations that I've had for the change makers in conversation, that the people who have to work in different industries namely the cigarette industry in this instance, not just because of you, like I said, multiple conversations, that those people might be missing out on some much needed coaching because
Yeah,
people are taking a stance. Yep.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And to me, see, it wasn't so much about the stand. It was the fact that I was so distracted by the thinking around it. I
Hmm.
didn't know that I could go in and do the work in the way that I would want to do the work.
Yeah.
Because that's another consideration, isn't it?
Yep.
Will we be working at our best?
Hmm.
And I don't think it's a simple one.
No.
And I've supervised enough people who've worked in challenging industries
Mm.
to know that if they feel they can do good and that they can help people effect changes that are positive ones, then the work can be rewarding for them. And then sometimes they hope that will be the case and it isn't, and then they choose to not continue to work in them too.
Mm. I'm just conscious of timing for us here today, so I want to get to the last question.
Sure.
And so it's l- that's not the last question. Yes, it is. What legacy? No, there's two questions. Sorry. What legacy do you hope to leave through your work?
Gosh, that's such a big, it's a big word, isn't it? Legacy. But in the end, um, of course, you could say things like our books are our legacy and things like that. But for me, the bigger things are the theme of what we've talked about, which is this idea of partnership and collaborating, of listening and hearing and of encouraging people. Um, and so the legacy for me probably will be things like the CCA, the Climate Coaching Alliance,
Mhm.
the Global Supervisors Network. Um, and yes, maybe some of the writing, because I am proud, particularly, well, obviously, there's the books that we worked on together.
I was just going to say, and our book, Eve, and our book.
The Ethical Coaches Handbook, and then the on my other shoulder, the Ecological and Climate Conscious
Mm,
Coaching book, which I am genuinely really proud of. I mean, for lots of reasons, but because it's an example of stories from around the world,
mm,
people sharing their stories, sharing approaches and ways people can do it, many diverse tools, but always from the basis of where are you? Just start from where you are, not trying to assume people will be anywhere particular, and just encouraging people to try things out, which might be the simplest of questions. And then I think the other thing as a legacy is it's actually, it's been quite a privilege to have worked with people like Magda Mook from the ICF and Hetty Einzig from the Association of Coaching and Rita Simmons from the EMCC Global on things like the joint statement to work with people who just we put aside because at that time I was chair of Apex, another professional body, is to put aside any individual hats, if you like, and just think collectively, what is it that we can model here and
mm,
do? And I do feel that societal issues are really important. Um, not just the ecological and climate crisis, but well, we are all very aware of it at the moment. Diversity, equity, inclusion. We know
mm,
what's happening in parts of the world around this. So I think that's an important part of what we do. And the other legacy, and I suppose we all hope we'll have, is through the work we've done with our clients, supervisees, um, coaches, individually, in groups, um, and I'm smiling because I just think of what fun I've had doing that work. You know, I think laughter is such an amazing thing, isn't it? We've smiled a lot as we've been chatting, and I think we learn so much if we can just smile and we can um, and have fun while we're doing things. So I just feel very lucky to have had the clients that I've had over the years.
mm. So the last question, you've kind of touched on it, and that is about, what is the call of our times, do you see? And what do you have a sense of what you might do to help that call?
Yeah. Well, I think we almost started here, didn't we? You know,
Mm.
we're recording this at a really interesting point in
Mm.
history where the world order is sort of being thrown up in the air a bit politically. And I suppose none of us can stay apart from that,
Mm.
because we're all living beings. So um, I struggle to say the most pressing
Mm-hmm.
issue, because I think there are pressing issues, and I believe the pressing issues are really connected, which you'd expect me to say, because of working systemically. One of the questions for me, um, and this is the question I keep thinking about, because you asked, what you think about,
Mm-hmm.
is what is our role to do? Is it to help support society as it is in a sort of unquestioning way? So, if you like, maintain the status quo, or if not, what? And I don't know that I can quite say the what, but I'm sort of there thinking about the what. Um, you know, in terms of pressing issues, we all see the reality of what's happening around the world. Um, if we think of climate and ecology, floods, firestorms. I mean, you've been to Australia recently. There have been so many instances of floods in one place, fires in another. Um, there are certain islands that are going to disappear, and then we have this thing about equity. The global north has caused a lot of these problems, and it's the global south that are feeling the first consequences often. So I suppose I feel that's not sustainable. Our use of resources isn't sustainable. There's something called Earth Overshoot Day, and if we went back to 1971, which is 54 years ago, we were using as many resources as the Earth could regenerate in a year. So we were actually fine. But now we're using nearly 1.75 Earth's worth of resources each year. Well, how long can that go on?
Mm.
So I do think that's a huge issue, because, to be honest, if we don't have the resources, what will happen to us
Mm.
all? We can't carry on as we are. Um, and you said, what have I done? Well, in many ways, I've started that by setting up things like the Climate Coaching Nights, which is now run by a wonderful group of volunteers across the world, with something like 40 groups in different countries, different languages. Um, excuse me.
Not so much what you have done. This is more forward looking about what you could do.
Yeah. Well, I think that works out in different ways. There's what we can each do personally,
Mm.
and then there's what we can do professionally.
Mm.
Um, so we can to some extent monitor the things we do in our own lives.
Mm.
And then I'm not sure that I have some brand new, this is what we do. I will certainly write more, and I have more, more books planned.
Mm.
Um, and I think just talking about these things, and talking about things in a way that is inclusive, because I think there's a lot of fear around this.
Mm.
Um, sometimes it feels easier to bury our heads in the sand than to face up to some of the things that are happening. I was reading, there's a piece of research done with 10,000 young people around the world, in 10 countries. And it was a fascinating piece of research. And I just remember, I can't remember it exactly, but one of the young people, they were all aged between 16 and 25, said, "You don't get it," to the researcher. "You don't get it. We're not going to see polar bears in our lifetime." That just that sense really sort of really brings it home. So listening, doing more, writing more, getting involved more. But I think for each of us, and this to me is really important, is doing the things that are right for us, not assuming that any one person should do any one thing, but do what works for us that we can contribute best to.
Thank you. So we'll call it quits here. We're out of
Thank you.
time. Thank you so much for an engaging chat, as always, with some laughter along the way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been great. And I think it's really taken us to the heart of ethics. So that's been fantastic.
Which just happened to be what we all decided would be the logo for the 2022 conference. I remember it was Pam McLean who said it's the heart of ethics. I said, yes, that's where we're going, with the heart of ethics for the second conference. So
Excellent.
thank you.
Thank you very much.